I'm Jim,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is Jim and
Jim.
Garrett at the movies. Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to be reviewing the box office winning Ralph Breaks the Internet, which I think we're just going to call Ralph Wrecks the Internet for our purposes, and because that's what the title should be. God damn it. And we'll also be continuing our Why the Hell Not Talk About the Godfather with The Godfather 2. And then we will be talking about This Week in Death. Um, Unfortunately, we'll be talking about the passing of the great Ricky Jay for our new segment. So let's get into this movie, this Ralph Breaks the Internet. Ralph Wrecks the Internet. I said that we were going to rename it, and then I screwed it up. Starring fantastic performances by John C. Reilly and Sarah Silverman. This is the story of it's a sequel of Wreck-It Ralph and Vanellope, who have to go into the internet to find a part for Vanellope's game that has broken, and they get into various hijinks and in the internet. What did you think, Garrett? I think that's pretty much the plot. There's not much else that I can say without spoiling it. It does set up what I think will be the best cinematic universe of all time, and that is the Disney Princess cinematic universe. But that's teased in the trailer as well, so that's not a spoiler. Most of the rest of the stuff that I could tell you about the plot might be a bit of a spoiler. So, what did you think of this movie?
Again, I'll do my usual practice of starting with the things I liked about it. I thought the performances were solid. There was some genuinely well delivered lines, or some good crafted humor. I thought it was interesting that there wasn't really an antagonist in the film. They set up several characters that made it look like they were going to be the antagonist, but then they somewhat artfully sort of turned it around and sort of said, no, I'm not the antagonist you're looking for. And in as much as there was any antagonist at all, it's just sort of general insecurity, if you will. That was a curious aspect of it. Those were I thought the good things. The bad things, the plot felt a little thin. An awful lot of the sort of the texture of it seemed to be just sort of like oh, hey, I recognize that thing from the internet, and I recognize that thing from the internet too, and it just seemed a little bit too ham-handed in that respect. Many people have compared it, perhaps not very flatteringly, to the Emoji Movie, which I haven't seen, but I can sort of imagine, somewhat why that comparison is there. Overall, I'd say it was fine. It's fine.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on your. I recognize that from the internet, and that from the internet, and that from the internet, because that was my cynical brain. Leeches onto those things and calls those product placement, but things that they are. That it's all product placement. She goes into Disneyland, like a particular Disney website, and of course there's product placement of other Disney IPs. There is Facebook and Twitter represented by actual birds, blah blah blah, like basic jokes about recognizing things from the internet. And I see that all is just product placement. And so cynically, I called this corporate synergy the movie, which originally my corporate synergy the movie was Disney's Christopher Robin, which came out earlier this year, in which the solve for one of the conflicts is that more people should go to Disney World. And so I'm cynical about that, but at the same time, I had delightful amounts of fun with this. I thought it was just a delightful film. I smiled, I laughed. I think this has more heart than what the Emoji Movie is purported to have. Once again, I have not seen, like you, I have not seen the Emoji Movie because I try not to watch really bad movies. And that, was universally panned. So I I think this has more heart to it. I think this has an actual message about how we interact with the internet, what the internet does to us, turning us into attention whores of sorts, and how you never go into the comment section because that'll ruin your life. So it plays with all of these jokes and aspects of the internet, and how the internet changes us as human beings. And I like that. I think there's more to this film and more depth to this film than I suspect the Emoji Movie has. And so I ended up really enjoying this film as I walked out of it. But as I thought more and more about it, that's when I started to dislike the product placement and the cynical aspects of this thing. That this is working as a very on-brand message for Disney IPs and Disney as a company, and that I don't know. I feel like I need to give this film 2 scores, like one as sort of an isolated piece of art, and one as a piece of corporately produced media. And in the former, I'm really high on the film. On the back end, just in the kind of context that this film was produced in, I'm pretty down on it. I would like to believe that art is created without these corporate influences, but I'm not naive enough to actually believe that.
See, now that's interesting, because I was neither as high on the film's artistic merits nor as down on the corporate synergy thing. I think it's a funny line. But I mean, after I think the Lego movie really kind of pioneered that, sort of the bringing the other properties in, and I thought the Lego movie did it really well, better than this, but this didn't do a bad job of it. I wasn't put off because of marketing or anything like that. It just seemed to me that, it's not so much that the writing is lazy per se, so much as that there was lots of lazy moments throughout the script, where it felt like they were trying to, get a laugh out of the audience by simply name dropping or presenting a thing. And yeah, I wanted more than that. I mean, a couple of the references did make me smile or chuckle with recognition, but on the whole, it felt like they kept going back to that trough over and over again, and it was a little tired. 15 minutes, and once I make it to the internet, 15 minutes on.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, as we're recommending this or not recommending this for viewers, I think that this will work for its intended audience, and it won't be a film that parents will be bored by. I think there's enough here that parents can sink their teeth into some of this stuff and enjoy it on more than just a surface level, whereas kids will be delighted by all the pretty colors and whatnot. So I think that, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I agree. I mean, again, there's obviously a difficult tightrope to walk for films. They're trying to be marketable and palatable both to young children and to parents of those children. Obviously, Pixar is sort of the gold standard here. I think this film falls short of most Pixar films, but nonetheless still succeeds at being able to please both of those demographics.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. So total, I'd give this 3.5 stars. I'd recommend it. I had a great time, although I felt bad about spending money on it.
I give it somewhere between 2.5 and 3. Okay. Again, I enjoyed it well enough, but I didn't feel it was really necessary. There wasn't really a whole lot more that needed to be done after the first film.
Did you like the first film?
Yeah, I did, more than this one. Again, not because it was better on it necessarily on its own merits, but just because there wasn't a whole lot new going on in this one that wasn't already handled reasonably well in the first one. So
cool. All right. So I think that's 2 recommends, one a little further down than the other. So go see Ralph Wrecks the Internet. Damn it. I renamed the damn film and I keep screwing it up.
Now here's one last thought on it, right?
Yeah.
You got to think they must have played with the idea of titling it Ralph Wrecks the Internet, and they didn't. They decided to defer to sort of the standard phrase about breaking the internet because of viral sensations and so forth. And that's in some ways indicative of, again, I think sort of this the subtle off-puttedness that we're both feeling. You know, that rather than sort of staying true to their own brand, they're kind of kowtowing or capitulating to the popular culture at large.
Yeah, that's kind of a metaphor for the whole film, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ralph Wrecks the Internet is a good movie, but Ralph Breaks the Internet is a cynical piece of shit. All right, let's talk about a film that's not a cynical piece of shit, not a money grab, although, you know, who knows. Godfather Part 2, because why not talk about The Godfather Part 2? We talked about The Godfather last week. You did not think it was amazing. I did. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about the sequel. What did you think about the Godfather Part 2?
It's weird because I feel like I have to, you know, caution this and qualify it a little bit, because it's going to sound like I'm being some sort of contrarian that's just shitting on classics because everyone else loves them. I'm really not. I'm really not. But I'm just trying to be
Yeah.
honest here. I wasn't impressed. I mean,
Wow.
as with the first one, there's lots of good things about it. It certainly isn't a bad film. It certainly isn't. You know, I'm not upset that I watched it. I mean, again, it's been over 20 years since I've seen it the first time. I'm not upset that I watched it either time. I don't want my time back. I'm not disappointed in the experience, quality experience, but it definitely didn't live up to the hype. I felt there were some rather, I mean, I'm not sure I would call them glaring, but I felt strong problems, strong weaknesses, strong flaws with the film, having to do with its structure, with the sort of the character arc again of Michael Corleone, which was my big complaint last time. And then, you know, sort of also I thought the third act, the resolution felt weak. So all those I'm happy to dig into, but maybe you want to start with that.
Okay. Yeah. I do want to dig into some of those things because I want to get into some of your thoughts, and I also want to just sort of say that any review that you or I do on the internet, either on this podcast or on the Deadly Analysis podcast, we're both just expressing our honest opinions about the films. Like, we're not trying to be contrarian. We're not, you know, clickbait bullshit. We're just, this is what we think of the movies, and, you know, honest opinions are better than you know, manufactured shit. So I love so I like this film. I think that this film is less cohesive than Godfather. I don't think that the stories of Vito Corleone and Michael Corleone fit as seamlessly as all of the stories do in The Godfather. But I think it's less cohesive, but I like the stories more. So I love the origin story of Vito Corleone. I think that is really compelling drama, especially when we sort of start out with Robert De Niro and this in the Best Supporting Actor winning performance, where he's a low level, you know, fruit salesman. He cleans up after a guy in the market, and then he sort of graduates to being a petty thief, and that's his origin story. I like these really humble origins, and we get to see Vito slowly build up his empire to become the man that he eventually becomes in The Godfather. I think that is fascinating and really well done, and I love Robert De Niro in this role. I think he's perfectly cast as a young Vito Corleone, and I think he does really well. I also like Michael's story a lot more. I think that he's much more ruthless, and this is good Al Pacino before he started getting all blustery and yelly, even though he's quite yelly in parts of this film as well. But it's more measured. There's more levels to Al Pacino's performance, and I like that some of the chess game of Michael, where he's trying to play multiple sides off of each other and figure out who ordered the hit on him at the beginning of the film. I think those are really compelling narratives. I like the Kay storyline. So all of the parts of this film I really, really enjoy. What I don't think that it cohesive as well as the Godfather does. So it does fall short in its whole, but I think the parts are much better than the original Godfather. So those are my thoughts. But I want to hear more about the things that you didn't like about this. I mean, you sort of drew it in broad strokes. Can you flesh out some of that?
Sure. Well, why don't we start with the structure, because that seems like where there may be some agreement. I think there's just absolutely no reason for these two stories to be in the same film. They have no real bearing on each other at all. It sort of seems like the logical sequel would have been the story of Michael going on, and they decided to just throw in this backstory about Vito, not because it's fan service per se, but just because they wanted to flesh out Vito Corleone, but they didn't want to give him his own movie. I don't know whether the story of Vito Corleone's origin would have, as a standalone film, would have worked or not. But I felt it definitely didn't work as just augmentation. It felt like a needless appendage. Now, don't get me wrong. The performance is fantastic. De Niro is absolutely amazing, especially because he's modeling such an iconic performance from the previous film. So I'm not complaining about the acting or any of the technical side of the production, but just story qua story, it doesn't make sense that these two stories are stitched together like this. If something about Vito Corleone's origin in some way inflected or reflected what Michael was going through in the story, it might have made sense to tie them together. But really, I saw no logical reason for these two stories to be juxtaposed together.
I can sort of agree with that. I'm trying to think. I mean, these aren't Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola didn't. I can't imagine that they just threw these in half baked. Like, I have to imagine that there's kind of some thematic or story related meshing of these two things, because when a film challenges me, or when I see something that's by good filmmakers, I always assume that there's not an accident to this. The problem is I can't actually think of a reason.
Yeah, and again, I'll admit that maybe it's there, and maybe I just missed it. I can't claim
maybe I missed it too.
Flawlessly analytic or anything like that. And maybe if someone else were to come along and explain it to me, I could see it in a new light. But I'm just reacting to what I saw on the screen and how and what I thought about it, what I felt about it at the time, and what I thought about it when I felt about it is these are two stories that aren't connected in any way other than they're both about men named Corleone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. Yeah, I can't really. I mean, Vito is trying to manipulate. Maybe I just realized something, and this might be, the narrative about the first Godfather is that Michael starts out in a place where he's idealistic, and then slowly we see him fate. Like, that's the narrative about the Godfather. Now, we fleshed out that narrative and we both kind of had problems with it, but I still ended up liking the Michael arc in the original Godfather. You didn't. But one of the things that I found interesting about Vito is he only kills bad guys. He only kills the Don who killed his mother and his father, and he kills the Don in New York, who is kind of he's super asshole and kind of has the town under his thumb.
Yeah, the black
Michael, on the other hand, has gone off the deep end, and he's started killing people who don't always quote unquote deserve it. And so maybe meshing these two stories together is to draw a contrast between Vito as a hard-nosed boss who has some moral compass, even though he is a murderous gangster, and Michael, who has lost all moral compass by the end of the film.
It's a noble effort. I'm not sure I buy it.
Well, I mean, it's a way that this film makes sense, and it's a way that I can understand how these two stories fit together. Is it a tenuous fit? Yeah, I grant you, but I think that there's still there's something there, that makes this to more of a juxtaposition between two characters, and I think that would be interesting if that were maybe a little bit clearer. But even then, I wouldn't be able to fix it. I wouldn't be able to be like, "Wow, this is why I'm doing this." I mean, they would just make the movie bad.
So anyway, moving on
Yeah.
to some
Other points.
You mentioned the K storyline. I liked the drama between them. Again, I thought the performances, especially when they come to a head, were powerful. But once more, narratively, there's that line in the beginning about how you said there was going to be wholly legitimate in 5 years. It's been 7 years. But it's sort of, I mean, I don't understand why Kay is suddenly feeling done with it. I don't see what it is. I mean, if she reacted that way, like immediately after the attempted assassination, or maybe like after she recomposed herself after the assassination, that might make sense. But what is, beyond the obvious, which has been around now for 7 years, what's her motivation for suddenly wanting to up and leave? And then sort of by, on the flip side of that, Michael, I mean, again, maybe my lens for Michael is different than what a lot of people have. But when you consider, the fact that he kills Fredo, kills his brother, he basically is, completely controlling his wife. It creates this impression for me that, for all his talk of family, Michael doesn't love his family. But it's weird because it doesn't really even seem like Michael really loves power all that much either, which sort of leaves me wondering, what the hell is Michael in this for? What is he getting out of this situation? Because I don't understand it.
I mean, I think that's one of the great tragedies of Michael, is that he's not taking much enjoyment out of this life, yet it is the life that he chooses to lead, and it's the life that he is good at, and it's the life that he it's the line from Godfather Part 3, which we're not going to do an analysis of. I wanted out, but they pull me back in, and that's the kind of I think that's actually a line that reflects Michael's entire life. I want out, but they'll pull me back in. I want something that I love and that's good for me, but in order to be good at the job, I have to divorce myself from those feelings. I mean, it's one of the most powerful lines from the original Godfather, where he's like, it was tell him it was just business. And I think that that's kind of the way Michael has oriented himself toward the world and his life. It's just business, and I have to divorce my heart from my head, and I have to succeed at this in order to protect myself and protect my family, even though I don't actually like either of those two things. I think that's a compelling inner conflict of the character.
But again, the thing is, it doesn't strike me as a conflict. I don't. It's the same complaint I had about the first film. I don't see him as conflicted at all. I mean, okay, that's not entirely true. I see him conflicted when he's trying to decide whether or not to forgive Fredo. And I was kind of glad that he forgave Fredo, because it suggested, no, he actually does love his family. But then, of course, he kills Fredo at the end. So it's kind of, it doesn't feel like a conflict. It feels like he's just sort of a machine, and he's just
you don't see him conflicted in that scene with Kay before she tells him about the abortion.
I mean, I saw. I mean, again, powerful performance after she tells him about the abortion, right? Where he's really sort of heartbroken by that. I mean, that was definitely powerful. But before she tells him about the abortion, no. It seems to me he knows. He says, "Look, you can't leave. This is the bottom line. It would be bad for me. I would look bad." I mean, he doesn't say it this way, but that was the subtext. I would look weak. I would look bad if you left, if you took my kids. So you can't leave, not because I love you and want to be with you, not because I love my kids and want to be with them, but because my position demands it. I mean,
he says very deliberately, she says, "I don't love you anymore. There's no love in here for you anymore," which I think is a beautiful, a line that actually, um, uh now I'm realizing it, Blue Valentine stole that line. But this yeah, she says there's no love in you, and he's like, "Yeah, you'll get it back, come on, you'll get it back." And that's actually, I've I don't know, I've been in those relationships where somebody has said they don't love me anymore, and I'm like, no, but come on, you'll get it back, surely. Of course, I know I'm lying to myself and the person, blah blah blah. It's a bad situation, but I think that's a inner conflict, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, but in practice, it's not there.
Mm.
I mean, let's put it this way: why did Kay love him in the first place?
Well, that is a problem with the first Godfather that we talked about last week.
Right, and but it carries
They
over
kind of strong arms her.
because again, the drama of her leaving, it's only compelling if it made sense in the first place. And it doesn't make sense in the first place. If they're not in love, if they weren't a love story, if there isn't a tragic love component there, then why should I give a damn about, I don't have any love left for you? It's like, I never felt the love in the first place. So what?
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from there. We don't get to see much of their relationship in any positive light before the shit hits the fan. Even the scene at the party at the beginning, it's not Michael and Kay, sitting in a tree, looking like, we're gonna be all right, you and me. And then, of course, it all falls apart. So I can see where you're coming from there. Still, that scene is fucking compelling as hell, though. At least for me. And
there's no denying the acting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the acting in this film pushes it over the edge for me, where I can sort of forgive some of the story complaints that you're bringing up. Well, and bring up more story complaints. What were some of the other?
So third act, okay.
Yes.
For Vito Corleone, sort of the end of his arc in the film is he finally gets his revenge. He kills the Don that killed his father, mother, and brother. And obviously there is a sort of straightforward, sort of payoff to that, right? Justice finally served. But at the same time, it doesn't do what I was expecting. I mean, again, because I've basically forgotten the film in its entirety since I saw it the first time. It didn't do what I was expecting the film to do, which is to show how he became Don Corleone, and that didn't happen. I mean, yeah, he's no longer the streets the shopkeep that he is at the beginning, but he still isn't really he's not the Godfather yet, and he doesn't even really have a crew. He's got a couple of guys with him. And so it's sort of, if you had watched, if you hadn't seen the first film, if you didn't know who Vito Corleone was, and you just watched the Vito scenes from this film, again, the story would be cohesive. It would hold together, and it would be, a good story. But you wouldn't necessarily sort of have the sense that this guy's going to go on to become the iconic gangster of all time. So it still feels like there's just this gap between, and a fairly capacious gap between where he ends at the end of the second film and where we meet him again at the beginning of the first. Now, I'm not saying that that gap had to be completely bridged, but I wanted at least a suggestion of the arc so you could sort of fill in, reasonably how he gets there. And I didn't feel that happened. And then for Michael's arc, 3 assassinations and it's done. Okay, I mean, there's all this stuff about how assassinating what's his name, Roth, is impossible. No, it's not impossible. It's just difficult. Wasn't that difficult? It was just
it was a suicide mission.
Yeah, it was a suicide mission, right? But that wasn't that difficult for Michael, right? It wasn't that difficult for the family. All they had to do is, you don't even see them find the right guy, right? It's not even like this struggle. It's just they had to find someone willing to lay down their life for it, and they did. Compare that with, everything they went through in the first film where Michael's trying to figure out the assassination. Do we hide the gun in the bathroom? That felt like a challenge that Michael had to overcome. This felt like a make it happen, and it happened. It didn't feel very dramatic. Any of those 3 killings. I mean, again, I felt it was tragic. Fredo's death was tragic because because he's the brother, and it's this whole thing: can he forgive? Can he not forgive? And there's indeed that great line about I don't want to stomp out everyone, just my enemies. That was a great line, and sort of it makes sense for how that all works out. But it didn't seem to tie together for me in a way that there wasn't much of a payoff. It just sort of felt like a wrapping up loose threads. In some ways, the film as a whole felt almost more like a series, like a television series rather than a film. You have all these little vignettes. This whole thing about Congress, right? The congressional hearings, which, I mean, again, it's not that it was uninteresting. It's just, but you could easily have just taken that out of the film and made it its own story that had little to nothing to do with anything else in the film. It's very episodic feeling, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it isn't cohesive. It isn't as sort of narratively fulfilling as a clear, just sort of arc and structure that ties everything up together in a satisfactory way, rather than the season's ending, we better kill off all the loose threads.
Let me respond to a couple of things. First, I think that the scene when he argues with the landlord, and the landlord then comes with his hat in his hand and says, "I'll lower the rent by $5. No, I'll lower it by $10." I think that's the scene where you're supposed to see Vito sitting back like Marlon Brando, and that's the point where he's sort of become Godfather-esque, even though he's not fully reached one of the 5 families as we see him in The Godfather. But I think that scene is supposed to be that bridge that you're talking about, and for me, that works. I see what you're saying about Michael killing, but I think it's well put into perspective by that last scene in the film where Michael says, "I've got some dreams of my own." And then it's an ironic ending because we see Michael's face remembering that. And I think you can read in Pacino's performance, the thing that he has become is not the thing that he dreamed he would become. And that as much as he wanted and admired his father's power in the first movie, that power has become not as personally fulfilling as he thought it might be. He's kind of chased a brass ring that ended up not being the thing that he wanted it to be. I want to do a little bit here, a little joke, because you brought this up, like, just make it happen. I wonder, is there like gangster henchman training school? Because they do these things where they just sit back and they go, and then like another monster like brings a cup of coffee to a guy. But like, I wonder, is there like a different gesture for coffee and a different gesture for kill the guy? And like, is there like a monster who screws that up where one of the mob bosses just goes, and then the guy shoots him. It's like, no, I just meant to bring him his coffee. What are you talking about?
Wait, take care of her? Take care of her? No, man, just take her out. Show her a good time.
Exactly, right. I think that'd be a funny bit for somebody to do it a parody send up if we ever had good ones of those, where he does one of these things and it ends up being, I shot her. No, you weren't supposed to shoot her. You're just supposed to bring her coffee. What the hell? Anyway,
I mean, obviously,
funny thought I had while watching the movie.
The film obviously, in many ways, it's iconic. It's a template. A lot of movies sort of copied and took took a lot of the vocabulary from this film. But at the same time, I feel that again, a story like Breaking Bad, for example, which clearly has some pretty serious debts to The Godfather, that I think for me has more of the tragedy element of it. I mean, again, this is not to take away from Pacino's performance. It's very, very solid, but I don't see that pain that you're talking about, that conflict that this is, this isn't what I wanted to become. I mean, again, I think that's more of the theme for the third film, but we're not going to talk about the third film.
Right. Maybe we could do the third film down the line.
Yeah.
I don't want to watch another 3 fucking hour movie.
So yeah, I mean, it's not that. I mean, again, it's not, I'm not saying I want to see a movie about that, because this isn't what the movie is about per se. But if the tragedy of the film is supposed to be, here is a good man who has fallen to corruption. Here is someone who had his dreams of his own, and now he doesn't recognize who he's become. I just don't feel that tragedy. It doesn't connect with me. So again, I don't know exactly why that is. Is it writing? Is it acting? Is it directing? Is it some combination of the three? But I hear people talk about this tragedy, and I don't see it as a tragedy. I see it as a gangster movie.
Okay. What would you give it out of 5?
3.
3. Okay. I'm at 5 again because I fucking love this. I think it's a different movie than the original Godfather, but I like it. I like so many parts of this movie. I don't know. Godfathers, they really work for me. And I'm a defender of Godfather 3, but we'll talk about that some other time. Let's talk about our sad news. As I said last week, we're gonna do This Week in Death as our news segments, unfortunately. This one really, what is both, it's ironic and unfortunate about these things, but the William Goldman, I kind of knew about him before, and so as I was preparing for this segment, I didn't learn anything new, but as I was preparing for this segment, I learned a lot about the great Ricky Jay, and everything I learned, I made me angry that I didn't appreciate him more while he was alive. So he's an actor. I think that he was fantastic in Magnolia, the David Mamet movies that he did, Heist, House of Gains, Things Changed, etc. He was really good in Boogie Nights. He was a great actor, but he was also known primarily as a magician, one of the best sleight of hand magicians in living today. Well, now he's not living. Working in modern times, and he was, if you watch any of his magic on YouTube, any of Ricky Jay and his 52 assistants, he was absolutely incredible. Some of the best sleight of hand that you will ever see. And one of the things that I learned as I was reading this great New Yorker article about him. It was published by Mark Singer in 1992. And there's a quote from this that I found just incredibly compelling. And he writes, the Singer writes, he quotes Ricky Jay, "Magic gives me more pleasure and more pain than anything else I've ever dealt with. The pain is bad magicians ripping off good ones, doing magic badly, making a mockery of the art." And that's one of the things that Ricky Jay, among all the other magicians, all the David Copperfields and the Chris Angels and the blah, blah, blahs and the Vegas acts, for Ricky Jay, there was something really there was an integrity to his art. And I'm not saying that these other magicians don't have integrity to their art, but there was something special and personal and immediate about Ricky Jay's magic and how he considered it an art form. He studied magic religiously, probably more than religiously. He was a incredibly knowledgeable historian of magic. He was an encyclopedia of magical history and sleight of hand history. And so the idea of him sort of experiencing this and sharing this experience as art with his audience was something that I thought was sort of the foundational principle of his life, and something that I think we can all celebrate, because there was an integrity to Ricky Jay, and that's why I think the like of him won't be seen for quite some time. Garrett, what'd you think when you heard about Ricky Jay's unfortunate death?
I thought of I think it was probably the first time I saw him on screen was in David Mamet's film The Spanish Prisoner, which I
Yeah.
think he had a moderate sized role, but a solid role. And he had a line. His character is drunk and he's hung over, and he says the line, "I put a thief in my mouth to steal my brain." And every single time in my life I've ever had a hangover, those are the words that went through my head. I put a thief in my mouth to steal my brain. It was just such a wonderful line and it delivered so well. And yeah, I mean, it's. I read somewhere on Twitter. I don't know if I didn't vet this myself, but someone said if you've seen a card movie made in the last 30 years, you can bet that the studio brought Ricky Jay in to teach the actor how to work with the cards, any kind of sleight of
Yeah.
hand, any kind of trick. Which, like I said, I don't know for sure it's true, but certainly would make sense if it was. Yeah, I went back and I watched large sections of his 52 assistants on YouTube. And yeah, his stage presence, his storytelling abilities, his mechanics, all utterly flawless. And one thing that struck me was in some ways his art suffers somewhat in virtue of time, because while his performance on these are all very solid, I imagine if I had seen it when it aired, it would have been a lot more astounding, because I wouldn't have known at the time how many of these tricks were done. But now, again, because of not just because of Jay's influence, but because of so much attention in magic and how much there needs to be cutting edge, a lot of the sort of the secrets behind this have been revealed, and it still doesn't make the technique any less impressive, but it does sort of in some way steal the sense that it is real magic. You can sort of say, okay, I know how this trick is done, even if I could never come anywhere near doing it so well myself. The Penn and Teller's Fool Us is another example of this, right? Where it's sort of by demystifying in some ways, it makes the older stuff a little less magical, but nonetheless impressive.
Yeah, I mean, he was absolutely fantastic. I mean, one of my favorite lines from Spanish. You brought up Spanish Prisoner. It's another Ricky Jay line where he is like interest paid in advance on a debt that never comes due. It's fantastic. He was so good at that sort of dry delivery of Mamet lines. I mean, there's one moment where Danny DeVito is threatening him in Heist, and he knows he's about to die, and he looks up at Danny DeVito's asking him for information. He says, "You must understand my reluctance to tell you." And he's perfect for Mamet dialogue.
Yeah,
And
yeah, he had some good lines in Heist. There was at least one other really good one, but it's escaping me at the moment. So
yeah, he was fantastic. You know, how are the things in the ad? This is another Spanish Prisoner. He has the Rebecca Pigeon character. How are things in the outer office? My troika was pursued by wolves. It's a good thing the cookie arrived unscathed. That's a perfect Ricky Jay line, and you can just imagine him saying that in that kind of dry wit that he has, that he had. I think that when I sat down to watch Magnolia for the first time, which if you've never seen Magnolia, sit down to watch Magnolia for the first time, hopefully without anybody telling you anything about it, and then just watch. As soon as Ricky Jay comes on with that voiceover, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a movie. This is gonna fuck me up for a little while. And sure enough, Magnolia did. He was a favorite of both Paul Thomas Anderson and David Mamet, both of whom are fine directors, and needed someone like Ricky Jay to be the guy who delivers the quick one-liner. And so it's really sad to hear of his death. I guess, yeah. Anything else that we want to say about Ricky Jay?
I think that's it for me.
Should I even mention the fact that Bertolucci died? Because Bertolucci died, but he was also kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't forget the thing that happened. I saw a tweet that was something like, Bertolucci died, but I won't forget the thing that happened to Maria Schneider.
Yeah, his Me Too never came, but the Me Too that comes for us all, I suppose, did. So
Yeah. Oh, that's poetic.
yeah.
That's poetic. Yeah. Some of his movies were very good. including The Conformist and what's the other one? The Liv Tyler one, Stealing Beauty. Those were good. But Ricky Jay is the one to certainly the one to mourn this week. Tune in next week where hopefully we don't talk about death. Hopefully we have another news segment that's not somebody cool died. We will be talking about The Front Runner. The review will be The Front Runner, the Hugh Jackman film. I have already seen it. Garrett, you're going to take a look at the Gary Hart biopic and tell us all of your thoughts about this film. Next week, we'll also be pairing that with Mike Nichols' Primary Colors, a film about politics that I have not forgotten ever since I've seen it, even though I've only seen it once. So I'm looking forward to rewatching Primary Colors, and hopefully it lives up to my memory. And we'll also talk about The Front Runner. So until next week, I'm Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this has been
Jim and Garrett
Movies. Good night.